She is being beaten. The words cracked through the elegant restaurant like a gunshot, freezing the air around them, at least for Lucas Merrick. His hand halted mid-reach for the glass of bourbon. Across the white-clothed table, his longtime associate and legal advisor, Dean Carter, continued speaking as if he hadn't just dropped a grenade into the middle of dinner. "I shouldn't be telling you this," Dean said, lowering his voice, urgency trembling through every syllable. He was married to a therapist. That was how he knew. His wife, Dr. Evelyn Ross, had come home 3 nights ago, shaking, sleepless, crying without stopping. She had collapsed and told him everything. Evelyn could lose her license. She could be sued. But she said she could not live with herself if something happened to that woman. Lucas's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening. Who? His voice was not a question. It was a command. Dean hesitated for the briefest beat, then spoke the name as though he were driving a blade straight into Lucas's chest. Claire Bennett. Her name cut through him like a sudden wound. Claire. That girl. No, not his. Never his. She was the woman he had quietly watched from afar for close to 2 years now. She ran a small pottery studio tucked along an old street in downtown Asheville. She had soft, chocolate-brown hair, eyes as still and quiet as a winter lake, and a gentle way of walking as if apologizing for taking up space in the world. They had never had a real conversation, only exchanged a few nods when they crossed paths at the corner coffee shop, a brief good morning when her shop opened just as he stepped out of his office. To her, he was only a stranger in an expensive suit. But to him, she was something delicate and untouchable, something beautiful he didn't dare reach for. And now someone was hurting her. Lucas shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the marble floor with a sharp, jarring sound. Several diners turned to look. His security team stationed a few yards away reacted instantly. "Lucas, wait." Dean reached for him, gripping his arm. "Who is doing it?" Lucas asked again, his voice quieter this time, colder, edged with danger. It was the kind of voice every man who had ever crossed him learned to fear. "Her husband, Ethan Callahan. They have been married not even a year. I know who he is." Lucas bit out each word. Ethan Callahan, a mid-tier investment banker with a forgettable face and a practiced charm at charity events. Lucas had seen him once, his hand resting possessively on Claire's back at a gala, while she smiled a smile that never reached her eyes. Lucas had hated him instantly. Now he would destroy him. "Lucas." Dean rose to his feet, voice dropping to a plea. "You can't act impulsively. There are legal procedures. My wife put everything on the line just to. Your wife did the right thing." Lucas's stare turned to steel. "Now it's my turn." He pivoted and strode toward the exit, his steps firm, unhesitating. Mason, the head of his security team, a broad-built man with heavy, quiet footsteps, fell into place beside him at once. "I want everything on Ethan Callahan. Finances, assets, routines, relationships. I want to know what he eats for breakfast and what he dreams about at night." Lucas pushed open the glass door and walked into the biting North Carolina winter night. In 1 hour. If you're still listening and this story touches something inside you, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Like and share this video to encourage us to keep bringing heartfelt stories every day. And if you don't mind, would you tell me where you're watching from? Leave a comment below. Let us know which corner of the world this story has reached. We treasure every word you share. Lucas stepped out of the restaurant, his breath rising like pale smoke in the cold air. Mason stayed close, solid and silent, his gaze sweeping their surroundings. Lucas paused on the sidewalk, the street lamp casting a hard glow across his stern features. "Where do we begin?" he asked, voice precise and icy. Mason flipped open the folder in his hands, a thin collection of what little they had gathered so far on Ethan Callahan. Lucas studied the photos, the financial transactions, the banking records. "I want his full schedule from the past 3 months, every detail, nothing overlooked. Everyone he met, everywhere he went, everything he did, ate, thought." Mason nodded, jotting notes quickly. Lucas lowered his voice, a command wrapped in pressure and purpose. "Track his daily habits, every person he encounters, his calls, emails, messages. I want to know what time he wakes, what he eats for breakfast, how he likes his coffee, every habit he thinks is insignificant but may reveal something." Mason wrote it all down, fast. Lucas turned, his eyes sharp as blades, staring ahead into the night as if picturing Claire in her home, trapped inside fear, her heartbeat in a constant state of alarm. Every step he takes, every time he checks his phone, I want a report. Pull security footage, social media, every data point we can follow. He doesn't get to hide. Mason hesitated for the first time, lifting his eyes. Sir, we'll do it. But he has no idea anyone is watching. We need time. Lucas inhaled deeply, his hand tightening on the seam of his coat pocket, his jaw locked, his voice low as rolling thunder. The first hour matters most. I want to know how he moves in the morning. His work hours, lunch, meetings. I need a map of every connection, every private corner he thinks he controls. Mason nodded sharply. Understood, sir. We'll have a full report before he leaves his apartment. Lucas resumed walking, watching the silhouettes moving across the street, feeling the urgency pressing against his ribs. He remembered the first time he saw Claire, the fragile strength in her posture, the forced smile, the pain hiding behind her quiet eyes. From that moment, a silent but fierce resolve had taken root within him. This was not something that could wait. Mason kept writing, aware that every word Lucas spoke was final, unquestionable. Lucas lifted his gaze to the star-dusted sky, imagining the small home where Claire now sat. Fear pressed against her like a shadow, her heartbeat trembling with every sound, and the helplessness he refused to tolerate. I don't want anyone to touch her, Lucas said, his voice cold and certain. Anyone who does will pay, not with a warning, with an end they will never forget. Mason wrote the words down like an oath. Lucas glanced again at the folder, his eyes lingering on a photo of Claire standing outside her pottery shop, lifting a large ceramic vase with the afternoon light glinting across her smooth brown hair. In his mind he murmured, "No one gets to hurt you, no one." Everything was set, the plan had begun. And Lucas knew that once he moved, there was no room for hesitation or mistakes. Time was the enemy, but his resolve was the sharpest weapon he had to protect the woman he had watched quietly for nearly 2 years. Claire Bennett sat inside her small pottery studio, her hands shaping a lump of clay she couldn't coax into any form. The afternoon light filtered through the window, brushing against the faint bruises along her wrists, marks she tried to hide beneath long sleeves, even though Asheville's autumn warmth still lingered. She drew a long breath, trying to steady herself, but her heart kept racing as if warning her of some threat she couldn't yet see. Every footstep on the wooden floor, every shiver of the window pane made her flinch. Ethan Callahan had just stepped out of the room moments ago, wearing his polished charm like a mask while his eyes burned with control, and Claire knew one wrong movement could ignite another burst of rage. She remembered the first time he raised his hand at her, the cold, erasing look in his eyes. Then came the next time, and the next, day after day, Ethan tightening his control around every corner of her life. What she ate, whom she spoke to, what she wore, where she paused long enough to breathe. Claire had learned to read his moods like weather patterns, to anticipate storms before they broke, to make herself invisible in order to survive. She glanced around the room, recalling every word Dr. Evelyn Ross had ever said, only to arrive at her own conclusion. She could not rely on anyone fully. There were moments she reached for her phone, moments she tried to text a friend, but Ethan always hovered, always watched, and one small slip could mean another bruise, another night of trembling silence. Claire had learned to detach from her pain, to catalog every bruise and scrape like evidence, even as she forced herself not to cry. She remembered one afternoon 3 weeks ago, when Ethan unleashed his anger, for no reason, and she tried to run, only to see him smiling with that cruel satisfaction as he threatened to destroy everything she loved, her studio, her connections, even the people she cared for most. Now she moved slowly around the room, rearranging pieces of pottery as a way to claim a small sense of control, however fragile. She remembered standing outside her shop, watching strangers walk by, wishing someone would notice her, truly see her not as a shadow learning to survive but as a woman who once had dreams. But hope had thinned to something barely breathing, replaced by a constant, exhausting vigilance. Every night, while Ethan slept, Claire stayed awake, listening to each shift of his breath, every rustle in the apartment, reassuring herself that she was still safe for one more hour. She had memorized the numbers of hotlines, the locations she might escape to, but never dared to use them. The one time she hinted at her reality, Dr. Evelyn Ross looked at her with a fear that told Claire everything. Ethan would find out, and he would punish her. She now stood before the mirror, lifting her sleeve to study the fading bruises, feeling both estranged from and familiar with her own skin. This was her body, yet it had become a vessel carrying fear. Every step she took, every breath she drew, was a calculation for survival. Claire Bennett understood she no longer had choices. Everything she did was a strategy to endure. Even the smile she gave customers was something she stitched together like a mask she needed to wear if she wanted to keep going. Deep inside, a fragile hope remained, thin as morning frost on a rooftop. But she knew that unless someone stepped in, someone willing to walk into the darkness she lived in, nothing would break the cycle of fear that had become her life. Claire Bennett stood in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she washed the dishes, the late afternoon light slanting through the window and catching on the faint bruises scattered along her arms, each one a quiet reminder of the punishments Ethan Callahan dealt out over the smallest things. A naive question, a smile offered at the wrong moment. Ethan stepped inside, his expression calm but his eyes cold as blades, a mocking smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low yet weighted with authority, the kind of tone Claire knew never meant a simple conversation. She set the dish down and stepped back, her heartbeat slamming against her ribs as she sensed a storm gathering without warning. Ethan walked toward her, each step measured, calibrated to tighten the pressure, his gaze sweeping over her, as though calculating every possible reaction. "Why were you thinking about leaving?" he asked, voice even, almost gentle, but threaded with danger. Claire opened her mouth, but only a shaky breath escaped. She knew no answer she could give would ever be safe beneath Ethan's scrutiny. He lifted her chin with a single finger, a gesture that mimicked tenderness, but carried power and threat. "If you dare walk away from this home, you will lose everything. The pottery shop, every relationship you have, your friends, even the people you love. I will make sure you regret every second of it." Claire tried to steady herself, but her pulse hammered wildly, each beat a warning of the rage hovering like a storm cloud above their apartment. Ethan circled her slowly, his voice cold, steady, reciting his conditions as though reading rules carved in stone. "Do you really think you get to decide anything for yourself? No. Every move you make follows me. If you try to run, I will tear apart everything you believe is safe, and no one will be able to save you." A chill crawled down Claire's spine. Her fingers tightened around the dish towel, and she thought of the afternoons she had stood outside her shop, watching strangers pass by, and quietly longing for rescue, for someone to see her, truly see her, and pull her out of the fear that caged her. Ethan stopped and stared straight into her eyes, his gaze drilling into her thoughts. "I am not joking, Claire. If you believe you can escape, I will find you. I will make sure you understand there is no place you can hide. Everything you care about will turn into your nightmare, and you will come back. Believe me." Ethan's anger did not erupt loudly. Instead, it simmered in every word, in every precise gesture, creating a suffocating pressure that left no room to breathe. Claire felt fear harden inside her, freezing every muscle. But still she stood upright, her eyes tracking each of Ethan's steps, trying to find a single crack, a single exit, knowing every escape route was already under his control. Ethan leaned closer, lowering his voice into a whisper that still sliced through her like ice. "You will never leave. Even if you try, you'll return. I'll make certain of it. Do you understand?" Claire couldn't speak, her vision blurred with fear, but she forced a fragile, brittle smile to her lips, pretending she was fine. Her heart felt ready to burst, anger and helplessness swelling until breathing itself became a struggle. Ethan stepped back, the smirk of dominance still lingering on his mouth, his watchful eyes scanning the room as if confirming his total ownership of it before he walked into the next room, leaving Claire standing there, trembling, her chest tight, and her pulse racing, the sensation of having survived a storm while still drowning in its aftermath. She moved quietly toward the window, staring out at the peaceful street beyond, whispering to herself that she had to find a way to survive, to find a hand, a voice, a miracle that could pull her out of this nightmare. But deep inside, she knew salvation would never come from Ethan. It could only come from someone entirely different, someone strong enough to step into the darkness that held her prisoner. And that was when the image of Lucas Merrick surfaced in her mind, faint but real, a fragile thread of hope reaching toward her. Lucas Merrick stood outside Claire Bennett's apartment, his hand resting on the doorknob, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat align with the quick, frightened breaths of the woman inside, a woman he had never spoken to directly. The hallway light cast a pale glow over his black suit, outlining him in a way that made him appear both commanding and cold. He knocked 3 firm times, the sound echoing through the quiet Asheville afternoon, and almost instantly he heard the sharp hitch in her breathing behind the door. Claire froze with her hand on the table, her palm damp with sweat, her heart pounding so wildly she thought it might break free. She moved toward the door, glanced cautiously through the peephole, and immediately recognized the figure she had seen in passing on the street or outside her pottery shop. He stood tall, broad-shouldered, hair a deep brown with faint silver at the temples, his angular face set in a stern line, and his bright winter blue eyes fixed on the door with an intensity that startled her. His voice drifted through the door, low and steady, carrying no threat, yet wrapped in a quiet authority she recognized at once. "Are you Claire Bennett? I'm not here to harm you. I need to speak with you. It's very important." Claire stepped back, her hand shaking on the lock, her heart squeezed tight. She wanted to run, to call for help, but another part of her, the part starved for safety, urged her to listen to this man. His voice carried a strange calm, as if he already understood the situation and knew exactly what had to be done. She remembered the long nights under Ethan Callahan's threats, the way fear wrapped itself around her until she could barely breathe. And suddenly, in Lucas's eyes, she had seen something rare. A flicker of hope, fragile yet undeniably real. She took a trembling breath and cracked the door open, her eyes fixed on his. Lucas remained still, his hands resting at his sides, careful not to invade her space, yet his presence alone filled the doorway with a quiet, protective force. "I know what's happening to you," he said, his voice deep, certain, a tone that told her these words were not meant to frighten but to reassure. "And I will do everything in my power to end it." Claire felt her throat tighten, her entire body shaking, her heart rattling inside her chest. She had never spoken to this man beyond a passing nod, yet the way he stood there, the way he spoke with absolute control and quiet resolve, made her believe he knew exactly what she had been enduring. Lucas watched her closely, reading every flicker of fear and confusion on her face before continuing. "I know you're terrified. I know you've never trusted anyone. But you don't need to be afraid of me. I'm here to protect you, and I'm not leaving until you're safe." Claire looked into his eyes, afraid and hopeful at once, the emotions swirling so fiercely she felt dizzy, and somewhere deep inside, she recognized this moment as something rare, perhaps the only chance she would ever have to escape the life she had been trapped in for so long. She stepped aside, opening the door a little wider, so he could enter without crossing her boundaries, and in that instant she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months, the sense of being seen, protected, and maybe, just maybe, free again. Lucas stepped inside, keeping his distance, his eyes never leaving hers, his voice low and steady. "You're safe right now. I need you to listen to me and believe that no one will hurt you again. You can trust that someone is finally on your side." Claire stood in silence, her heart still racing, but for the first time in months, a thin ribbon of peace threaded itself through her fear, and she knew her life would never be the same. Lucas Merrick had stepped into the darkness she'd been trapped in, and from this moment on, everything would begin to change. Lucas Merrick stood inside Claire Bennett's small apartment, his hands relaxed at his sides but his gaze fixed on her, his voice low, steady, and entirely free of threat. "You don't have to be afraid of me. I didn't come here to hurt you. I know what Ethan Callahan has done to you, and I won't let it continue." Claire instinctively stepped back, her heart pounding, her body trembling, trying desperately to appear composed even though her eyes betrayed the fear she had carried for far too long. Lucas watched her closely, recognizing that every tiny movement she made was shaped by caution, by survival, and he knew this first moment demanded absolute gentleness. He drew in a slow breath, his voice dropping even lower. "I know you've been trying to survive on your own. I know you've taught yourself to hide your pain, to detach from what hurts so no one can see how fragile you feel. I understand that. But now, you don't have to endure any of this alone." Claire looked at him, suspicion and hope tangled together in her expression. She didn't know how much he knew, or why he could stand before her with such calm certainty. Lucas took a single step forward, still keeping a respectful distance, his tone even and grounded. I know Ethan has controlled every part of your life. How you eat, how you speak, how you move, and whom you're allowed to see. I know you've never had anyone you could trust. But I'm here now, and I will protect you. No one will hurt you ever again." Claire exhaled shakily, her eyes glossing with tears, wanting so badly to believe him yet still terrified to let herself hope. You know all of that?" she whispered, her voice hoarse and unsteady. Lucas nodded, his expression firm, his tone deep. "I know because the wife of a friend of mine, Dr. Evelyn Ross, was your therapist. She told us what you've been living through these past months, and I couldn't sit still knowing someone was hurting you." Claire closed her eyes, tears spilling silently, the kind of tears held in too long, falling quietly down the collar of her shirt. Lucas took another careful step closer while maintaining space, his voice calm but carrying a cold, cutting resolve. "I need you to understand that I won't do anything you don't want, but I will make sure Ethan can never touch you again. I will do whatever it takes, in my own way, to protect you." Claire opened her eyes, meeting his, and in that moment, fear and fragile belief collided within her. Lucas dipped his head slightly, his voice softening. "You don't need to make any decisions right now. Just listen to me. Know that you are safe in this moment. And know that you won't be alone anymore." Claire slowly backed up until her shoulder touched the wall, her heart racing so hard she felt each beat echo through her ribs. But for the first time in months, a faint thread of safety slipped into her chest. Lucas watched her closely, noting every tiny shift in her breathing, understanding that she was standing at the edge of two worlds, one ruled by fear, and one just beginning to open into possibility. He inhaled deeply and held her gaze. "You have a choice. I'm not forcing you to do anything, but I need you to know that I'm here, and I will do whatever is necessary to keep you from being hurt again. You can believe that at least right now you are protected." Claire looked at him, her heartbeat finally slowing a little, a thin wash of relief softening her features. Her tears remained, but for the first time in so long, she felt a breeze of peace stir through the heavy fear she had lived under. She knew her life was opening toward a new door, a chance not guaranteed, not easy, but real to survive and to trust someone other than herself. Lucas remained still, never pushing into her space, his eyes steady with resolve and patience. And in that quiet, suspended moment, an NRNT priestess, invisible thread formed between them, between her pain and his determination to shield her, promising that she would no longer face the darkness alone. Claire Bennett stood for a long moment at the doorway of her apartment, her heartbeat still rapid, her breath wavering as fear and hope braided together inside her. Lucas Merrick stood beside her, maintaining a respectful distance just close enough for her to feel safer, yet not overwhelmed. His presence was strong, deliberate, protective, without ever crossing the boundary she needed. She knew that stepping out of the apartment with him was the most significant choice she had ever made, but also the only choice that could free her from the months of terror holding her captive. She lowered her head, drew a deep breath, her hand trembling against the doorknob. Lucas spoke softly behind her, his tone deep and steady. "You don't have to rush. Step out only when you're ready." Claire closed her eyes, remembering the endless days under Ethan Callahan's control, the bruises hidden beneath sleeves, the sleepless nights filled with dread. And then she opened her eyes, looked at Lucas, and realized she could not go back. She stepped forward. He followed her, his broad shoulders subtly shielding her from sight, every movement measured to avoid drawing attention from neighbors or curious eyes. As they walked down the hallway, she felt each step like a small escape, each breath like a fragile reclaiming of herself. Lucas said nothing, guiding her with steady glances and quiet gestures, every part of his presence reinforcing the promise that she was safe. When they reached the car, Mason was already there, standing guard, his expression firm but not unkind. He opened the door for Claire. She hesitated for a heartbeat before sliding into the back seat, her nerves trembling but her chest loosening ever so slightly. Lucas took the driver's seat, started the engine, and glanced at her through the mirror, his tone calm. "You're safe now, at least until we get where we need to go." Claire looked down at her hands, still trembling, and thought of her pottery shop, the tiny sanctuary she had carved out for herself. She knew she would have to leave it behind temporarily, she hoped, but she also knew survival mattered more than any place or object she held dear. As the car pulled away from the curb, The streetlights cast long shadows across her face, revealing exhaustion but also the faint beginnings of something new. Lucas drove slowly, his voice steady once more. "I know this is a big step, and you have every right to be afraid, but you need to understand this is the only way to escape Ethan. And I will not let anyone harm you again." Claire felt the conviction in his words, each one anchoring a small piece of her fractured trust. Part of her still recoiled with fear, but another part leaned toward hope, toward the possibility that Lucas might be the way out of the darkness. As the car turned onto the main road, Claire watched the familiar buildings fade into the night, a mixture of grief and relief sweeping through her. For the first time, she felt the quiet truth settle inside her. She did not have to live trapped in fear anymore. Lucas drove through the gentle hush of Asheville's evening streets, the lamplight cutting across his calm, focused profile. He didn't speak again, choosing instead to make sure she was safe. Claire listened to the rhythmic hum of the engine, to her own breath growing steadier, and realized that from this moment on, her life had entered a new chapter, one where she might finally trust someone else, where hope, fragile but real, could take root again, and where fear would no longer dictate every corner of her existence. Claire Bennett sat on the sofa inside the small wooden cabin tucked deep within the woods outside Asheville, the soft afternoon sunlight streaming through the window and casting warm golden bands across the floor so different from the harsh, cold light and suffocating tension she had grown accustomed to in her old apartment. The silence was gentle here, no sudden footsteps, no threats tucked into every shadow, only the rustling of wind through the leaves and the distant call of birds, sounds that made her feel a peace she thought had vanished from her life forever. For the first time in months, she inhaled deeply without flinching, her heartbeat gradually settling back into a steady rhythm. Lucas Merrick had prepared everything with meticulous care. The cabin was tidy, stocked with the essentials, clean clothes folded neatly, food arranged in the kitchen, and a quiet room set aside just for her to rest. Claire walked around the cabin, her hand brushing the wooden walls, the faint scent of pine and old fireplace smoke giving her a sense of warmth and safety she had long forgotten existed. She placed her small bag on the table, looked out the window toward the endless forest stretching to the horizon, and realized that for the first time in many months, she had space that belonged entirely to her, space no one could invade. Lucas appeared with his usual calm presence, sitting in a nearby chair, saying nothing, only observing her gently as she adjusted her breathing and emotions. His presence was strong but never oppressive, something new and disorientingly comforting to her. In the first days at the cabin, Claire often woke early, stepping onto the porch to breathe in the fresh morning air and watch the mist drifting through the branches. Each quiet moment felt like a gift she had never been allowed before. She began preparing simple meals for herself, the smallest act of independence filling her with a quiet pride, no longer terrified of an angry, judgmental gaze watching her every move. Lucas watched from a respectful distance, stepping in only when necessary, allowing her to rediscover what safety felt like, to adjust to the idea that her life could be hers again. Claire also began, sorting through her emotions, writing in her journal, capturing her fears, her wounds, and the fragile threads of hope she barely recognized. With each sentence, each page, the weight on her chest lifted a little more, like a chain slowly being loosened. Sometimes Lucas brought her books, small items from the city, reminders of the world beyond the cabin, without breaking her sense of sanctuary. Claire walked along narrow forest trails behind the cabin, listening to the crunch of fallen leaves, the murmur of a distant stream, realizing that for the first time in months, perhaps years, she felt truly free, even if only temporarily. In the evenings, they sat by the fireplace. Lucas seldom spoke, only giving her brief updates about Ethan, delivered in a neutral tone but enough for Claire to understand things were under control, that she was protected, and that fear no longer dictated every beat of her heart. The feeling was strange but soothing. Her body unwound, her pulse softened. Claire knew these early days in the cabin were crucial steps toward healing, toward learning that she had the right to live safely, to breathe, to move, to think, and to dream without punishment. At night, staring up at a sky full of stars, she felt a deep peace settle through her, a peace so profound she barely recognized it. And in that quiet moment, she understood that this was where she could begin again, slowly relearning trust, relearning life without fear, and she knew her healing journey had truly begun. In the days that followed, Claire Bennett began to feel a noticeable shift within herself. Her small gestures, her breathing, her movements, none of them carried the constant tremor of fear that had shadowed her for so long. Lucas Merrick had become more than just a protector. He was a steady, silent presence, his blue eyes watchful without ever being controlling, his deep voice calm enough to anchor her without stirring anxiety. In the beginning, Claire kept her distance, measuring every gesture, every word. But day by day, as Lucas stepped back and allowed her to arrange her belongings, to take walks alone, to prepare meals the way she liked, she slowly realized she could trust him at least, a little. One afternoon, she sat by the window with a cup of hot tea, the sunlight filtering through the branches and painting patterns on the floor. Lucas sat across from her in silence, simply watching, neither impatient nor intrusive. Claire found herself relaxing, drawing a deep breath without fear that a single wrong movement would trigger someone's anger. She began to share small stories about her pottery shop, the regular customers, the sculptures she restored, the pieces she poured her heart into week after week. Lucas listened attentively, nodding at the right moments, never interrupting, never judging, quietly showing her that her words mattered. For the first time in months, Claire smiled a small, genuine smile, and Lucas returned it, his expression still serious, but softened, as if telling her she could let herself open up a little without being hurt. The next morning, Claire walked along the forest path behind the cabin. Lucas kept a respectful distance, watching without hovering. As the breeze brushed through her hair, Claire realized she felt free, truly, astonishingly free. She began telling Lucas about her early days at the pottery shop, her struggles, her long nights trying to perfect her craft, and Lucas listened with the same steady focus, his presence warm and grounding. A quiet connection began forming between them, something small but strong, something she had never felt with anyone since Ethan Callahan had entered her life. At night by the fireplace, she found the courage to speak about her loneliness, her exhaustion, the moments she felt she couldn't endure anymore. Lucas never rushed her, never urged her beyond what she offered. He answered in short, weighted phrases, each one showing her that he understood, that he respected her, that she wasn't invisible. Claire began noticing the little things, the gentle way Lucas rested his hand on the table, the way he watched her without stepping into her space, the way he stayed silent when silence was what she needed. Each gesture taught her, in tiny increments, how to open her heart again. She laughed more, walked farther, cooked her favorite dishes without dread, and with each day, her trust in Lucas deepened. One evening, as they sat across from each other at the small cabin table, the firelight flickering over Lucas's face, Claire realized she no longer felt alone. Safety and care warmed her from the inside, and she understood that what was growing between them wasn't simply protection, it was the fragile, foundational beginning of trust. On a quiet afternoon, with sunlight pouring through the cabin windows, Lucas Merrick sat across from Claire in an old armchair, his eyes serious yet gentler than she'd ever seen them. His voice was low, steady, and resolute. "Claire, there's something I need you to know about me, so you understand why I'm here, and why I couldn't ignore what was happening to you." Claire tilted her head slightly, curiosity and hesitation mingling in her eyes. Her heartbeat was still fragile, still uncertain, but she sensed that whatever he was about to say would change how she saw him. Lucas breathed deeply and glanced toward the window, as if weighing each word. "I'm not a good man in the way people think of good men," he said quietly. "I've done things you would never imagine. I run an organization that operates outside the law, where strength and power are built through fear, through choices most people could never make." Claire's eyes widened, her heart beating harder, a ripple of fear and fascination slipping through her. But there was no pride in Lucas's voice, no arrogance, only truth, laid bare. He continued, his words slow and deliberate. "I started when I was just 20 with Collis. Nothing, no money, no connections, only a promise to myself that I would build enough power so no one could ever hurt the people I loved again. I watched my mother be destroyed by a man like Ethan Callahan, and I swore I would never let that happen to anyone I cared about." Claire felt her chest tighten, tears gathering again, her voice lost. She simply listened. Lucas held her gaze, unwavering. "I've spent 20 years building this world, this shield, so I can protect the people who matter to me in ways the law never could. And when I learned what you were living through, I couldn't walk away. I came here because of you. to make sure Ethan never gets the chance to hurt you again." A strange mix of fear and trust washed over Claire, an uneasy blend that somehow felt right. Lucas was not only strong, he understood her suffering, understood fear from the inside out. He had lived through his own darkness and built his life as a weapon against it. He sighed, his voice dropping to a softer timbre. "I know what I'm telling you might scare you, but I need you to hear the truth. I'm not perfect, not even close, but I know right from wrong. And protecting you is the one thing I won't walk away from." Claire sat still, her heart tangled between fear and faith. For the first time in so long, she realized she could trust, if only a little, that not all men were like Ethan, and that the protection Lucas offered was real. She inhaled deeply, her voice barely above a whisper. You went through all of that, and you still came to help me?" Lucas nodded, resolve etched into every line of his face. "Yes, I couldn't ignore you. And I will do everything in my power to keep you safe, but it won't be easy. I'll need your cooperation, but only as far as you're comfortable." Warmth spread through Claire's chest, surprising and steady. For the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. Lucas continued, his voice unwavering. "I've known fear. I've known loss. And I know what it feels like to live in the shadow of something terrible. But you're not alone anymore. We'll move through this one step at a time, and I won't leave." Claire nodded softly, her tears still falling. But inside her, trust, delicate yet firm, began to take shape. A connection, fragile but unbreakable, formed between her and the man before her, the man who was both fierce and gentle, the man willing to pull her out of the darkness she had lived in for so long. And in that quiet moment, Claire understood. Her journey of healing, and of learning how to trust again, had truly begun. Claire Bennett sat inside the cabin, her hands trembling around a cup of tea, the late afternoon light filtering through the window and scattering into soft, dancing patterns across the wooden floor. Even though Lucas and his security team had insisted she leave behind all her old communication devices for her own safety, in a moment of weakness driven by the fear etched deep into her instincts, Claire had secretly kept her old phone, tucked far at the bottom of her bag. She only meant to turn it on for a second, just long enough to see whether another threatening message had appeared, a toxic habit she had developed to anticipate Ethan's moods. But the moment the screen lit up, the sharp, slicing sound of a ringtone shattered the quiet. Ethan appeared on the screen like a ghost rising from the dark. Panic seized her. Her fingers trembled, and she answered without thinking. "Hello?" Ethan Callahan's familiar voice flooded through the speaker, low, controlled, saturated with power. "Claire, did you really think you could escape me? Did you think turning off your phone for a few days meant I wouldn't know the moment you turned it back on?" Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it was being crushed. Claire squeezed her eyes shut as the old terror surged through her chest. You can't scare me anymore," she whispered, but her voice trembled with every syllable. Ethan's cold laugh echoed through the line, a sound that made her blood run cold. "Not scared? You've always been scared. And now, thanks to you turning on that phone, I know I still have you within my reach. Do you think that man can protect you forever? I will find you." At that moment, Lucas Merrick stepped into the room. He took in everything instantly. He didn't explode with anger. Instead, he crossed the space in 2 swift steps, gently took the phone from Claire's shaking hands, and removed the battery in one fluid motion, severing the call at its root. He looked at her calm, focused, his eyes sharp enough to read every flicker of fear on her face. His voice was steady, low, and grounding. "It's all right. He only got through because you turned on the old phone. He doesn't know where you are. Now that it's off again, he's blind. You're safe." Claire sucked in a shaky breath, tears spilling from a mixture of fear and regret. "I'm sorry. Lucas nodded gently. "I know. Fear makes us do things that make no sense. But from now on, let me handle it." Claire stood frozen in the quiet cabin, clutching a blanket to her chest, her heart still pounding as if it might burst through her ribs. She looked at Lucas, the man who had just steadied her after Ethan's call, and saw in his eyes a rare combination: cold, immovable determination, and a fierce protectiveness meant only for her. She knew he would do anything to keep her safe, even things she couldn't bear to imagine. That thought comforted her and frightened her at the same time. She drew a long breath, her voice trembling but resolute. Lucas, you have to promise me something. He turned fully toward her, his gaze unwavering. Tell me. I'm listening. Claire swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying all the weight in her heart. I don't want anyone to die. Not Ethan. Not anyone. I just want to live. I just want to be safe. You don't have to kill him to protect me. I don't want that. Lucas fell silent for a moment, his expression calm but deep, as though weighing her wish against the strength of his own instincts. Claire, he said slowly, his voice dropping into a deeper register. I hear you, and I understand. I will not let anyone hurt you again. I have other ways effective, permanent ways that don't cross that line, but I will not allow him to cause you any more pain. A warmth spread through Claire's chest, easing the grip of panic. Her tears slipped down her cheeks again, this time not from terror but from relief. She stepped closer to him, her voice trembling. So you can stop him, without killing him? Lucas nodded once, his eyes never leaving hers, his voice steady as stone. Yes, I'll protect you in whatever way you're comfortable with. I don't need to kill him to end your fear. There are other methods, clean, safe, and final. But you must trust me. Claire drew in another shaky breath, her voice soft, her eyes wet. I trust you, but you have to promise that no one gets hurt because of me. I don't want blood on my hands. Lucas inclined his head, his voice low but gentle, the kind of gentleness forged from strength, not fragility. I promise, Claire, no one will die because of you. We'll put an end to this fear, but in a way you can live with. I want you safe, not burdened by regret. Claire felt a strange peace settle inside her, quiet but profound. For the first time in months, fear no longer controlled every pulse of her heart. She looked around the cabin, sunlight softening the room, and realized that in this moment right now she was not alone, not threatened, not trapped. She finally had a choice. Lucas stepped closer, keeping a respectful distance but remaining firmly within reach, his voice steady, yet softened at the edges. You won't face this alone. I'll handle everything, and I'll stay within the limits you set. No one will be harmed without your consent. You have my word. Claire felt her heartbeat loosen, her breath ease. Tears slipped freely down her cheeks, but for the first time in so long, they weren't tears of terror, only relief. And in the stillness of the cabin, with the fading afternoon light resting gently around them, she realized she could finally breathe. The fragile but powerful trust forming between her and Lucas shimmered like an invisible thread, binding their two worlds together no longer in the shadows of fear, but in the promise of safety, choice, and control over her own life. In that quiet moment, Claire knew this was the true beginning not just of survival, but of living again. Lucas Merrick sat in the cabin's small study, the late afternoon light streaming through the window in soft golden streaks across the wooden desk where documents, notes, and printed evidence on Ethan Callahan were spread out in measured order. There were schedules, bank transactions, financial records, and photographs documenting his threats and abuse toward Claire Bennett. Lucas ran his hand across the papers, examining each detail with razor-sharp focus, his blue eyes cold and unwavering. Claire stood nearby watching him, her heart beating intensely, though this time not from fear but from a tension mixed with hope, knowing that what they were planning could determine whether she would truly be free. Lucas looked up at her, his voice low and steady. Claire, everything has to be done correctly. We can't give Ethan even the smallest opening to twist this around. The evidence must be clear, solid, and the way we expose it has to leave him no room to deny anything. Claire nodded gently, trying to steady her breath, feeling a blend of nerves and relief, knowing that for the first time in months, she would be standing on her own ground, no longer forced into silence. Lucas continued, scanning the pages in front of him. We'll approach the media strategically. Your story has to be told in a way that reflects the full truth, without distortion. We'll choose a reputable journalist, someone experienced in reporting on abuse survivors, so you'll maintain control of your narrative. Claire inhaled deeply, her fingers curling slightly as anticipation and determination entwined, realizing the power in finally telling her own story. Lucas pointed to specific notes. We'll reveal the evidence step by step, threatening texts, recorded calls, photos of the injuries, financial records, every controlling behavior. Every detail must be verified. When your story goes public, Ethan won't have the ability to twist public opinion or claim innocence. Claire watched him, feeling tension and trust intertwine. Recognizing how meticulously Lucas had planned everything so precise it startled her, yet deeply reassured her, he drew a slow breath, his voice steady. "We're not acting out of emotion. We're following strategy. Before anything becomes public, every piece of evidence will be authenticated, every detail documented. We'll force Ethan to face consequences he cannot evade, and you'll have the chance to stand up and tell your truth without fear of being overturned." A warmth rose through Claire's chest, an anxious but liberating sensation knowing that for the first time in months, she wasn't a passive victim. She was part of a plan that put her in control. Lucas stood and walked to the board beside the desk, pointing to each objective and timeline. "Tomorrow we contact the journalist. We'll prepare the interview, make sure everything is said the way you want to say it. Then, step by step, every action, every account, every abusive pattern will be brought to light in logical order so the world sees the full picture. Ethan's power ends there, and you take back control of your life." Claire lowered her gaze and wrote down notes with trembling hands, her heart beat loud but steady, feeling the anticipation pulse through her, knowing she was on the verge of having her story heard, validated, and protected. Lucas looked at her then, his expression softening, his voice still low but firm with conviction. "Claire, I'll be with you through all of it. I won't let anyone hurt you. And we'll do this in the way you feel safest. When the truth is finally revealed, you won't have to live in the shadows anymore. You'll be free but on your terms." Claire took a long breath, the tension gradually shifting into resolve. She understood now that every step had purpose. Every action was part of reclaiming her life. And for the first time in months, she felt strength rising from preparation, from Lucas's unwavering support, and from the chance to tell her truth so the world could finally see who caused harm and who deserved the freedom to live without fear. Claire Bennett now sat across from Patricia Holloway, inside a softly lit studio, cameras arranged, carefully, microphones clipped in place, everything prepared to ensure her story would be told accurately and safely. Claire's heart pounded and her breath came unsteadily, not from fear this time, but from a tense mixture of anxiety and resolve. She met Patricia's eyes, the seasoned journalist with 2 decades of experience covering stories of abuse victims, eyes filled with understanding and free from judgment, allowing Claire to exhale a little. "Let's start from the beginning," Patricia said gently but with quiet firmness. Claire drew in a long breath, her body taut at first, then slowly unwinding, and she began recounting the months she lived in fear, how Ethan Callahan controlled every detail of her life, from her meals, her movement, her relationships, to the way he monitored her phone and bank accounts, twisting even the smallest act into a reason to punish her. Her voice was raspy and trembling at first, but gradually steadier, stronger. She described the bruises on her arms, the times he shoved her against the wall, the sleepless nights filled with dread, the suffocating loneliness of suffering where no one could see. Patricia listened with patient eyes, never interrupting except to clarify a detail, and Claire continued, speaking about every attempt she made to seek help, every dismissal she endured, every moment she felt compelled to hide her pain even from friends. She spoke of the single, fragile moment she dared to confide in her therapist and the terror that followed knowing Ethan might find out. When she reached the moment Lucas Merrick entered her life, protecting her, helping her escape, the tone of her voice shifted. It steadied, softened, brightened. Her eyes glistened, but with something new, hope. She spoke of the cabin, the quiet space, the mornings where she could breathe without fear, walk without being watched, eat without being judged. She spoke of Lucas not as a savior, but as someone patient enough to let her inch toward trust, someone who gave her the room to feel safe again. Claire explained Lucas's plan, the careful gathering of evidence, the strategic media preparation, and the transformative realization that she could finally control the narrative of her own life, speak her truth without fear of it being twisted. Her voice quivered with determination as she described the feeling of release of sensing, for the first time in months, that fear no longer dictated her existence. When Patricia asked how she felt once her story aired, Claire exhaled deeply, tears sliding down her cheeks, and said it was overwhelming relief, a blend of fear, joy, tension, and peace, knowing she had stepped out of the darkness. She spoke about watching Ethan lose his power bit by bit, each abusive message and controlling act exposed to the world, and realizing justice could exist without violence or revenge. Behind her, Lucas stood silently, watching her every reaction, his presence calm yet razor alert, ready to protect at any second, and that alone kept her grounded. Claire described, with a trembling but unwavering voice, how for the first time in months she felt free, able to breathe, to live, to exist as herself again. Sharing her story was not just a release, but a message to anyone still trapped in fear, that they were not alone, and that reclaiming control was possible. When the interview ended, Claire sat still for a moment, her hands shaking, but her heart light, tears running down her cheeks not from fear, but from liberation. For the first time in months, she felt truly heard, truly seen, and truly free. Only a few days after Claire Bennett's interview aired, Ethan Callahan began to feel the first tremors of his collapsing power, uncontrolled phone calls erupting in his office, messages from bank partners questioning his integrity, delayed transactions, major contracts falling apart without explanation, and his once polished reputation crumbling piece by piece. Lucas Merrick monitored every one of Ethan's reactions through the information network he had meticulously built, tracking every move with surgical precision, leaving Ethan no room to maneuver. Claire sat by the cabin window, watching each new alert from the media, her chest tightening with a mix of anxiety and relief. For the first time in months, she felt fear giving way to hope, to a quiet belief that justice was finally unfolding before her eyes. Ethan attempted to deny everything publicly, insisting that the accusations were fabricated, but each piece of evidence, every message, photo, and part of Claire's testimony was released methodically by the media, stripping away his defenses. Former clients withdrew their funds, business partners severed ties, regulatory agencies launched independent investigations, and all his efforts to manipulate public perception collapsed under the weight of undeniable truth. Claire glanced at Lucas, her eyes bright with trust and gratitude, knowing that everything unfolding now was the result of his precise planning, his careful preparation, and his unwavering refusal to overlook even a single detail. Lucas stood near the window, calm and silent, yet every movement of his body conveyed absolute command, as if he were quietly steering the entire situation, shielding her while simultaneously dismantling Ethan's power at its core. Within days, Ethan's reputation was in ruins. Those who once respected or feared him now turned their backs. The media published verified evidence, calls from attorneys and investigators intensified, and finally he realized he no longer possessed any power, no influence, no leverage, no one left to silence or intimidate. Claire felt a wave of happiness and relief surge through her, tears slipping down her cheeks as she witnessed justice prevail, not through violence or retaliation, but through patience, preparation, and the simple force of truth unveiled. Lucas turned to her, his voice low and gentle. "Claire, you're safe now. He has no way to hurt you anymore, and everyone can finally see who he really is." Claire smiled, feeling freedom and relief blooming through her chest, her heart easing from the weight of months spent clenched in fear. She looked out into the forest where the late afternoon light shimmered through the trees, and thought of all the nights she lay awake in terror. Every moment she lived under his control, now fading into the past, making room for a new beginning. Ethan was summoned by authorities, the legal case against him fortified with every piece of evidence Lucas had collected and verified, making any denial or escape impossible. Claire felt a quiet joy and deep satisfaction rise within her. She had survived. She had proven she was not a passive victim, and justice had prevailed because of courage, patience, and truth. Lucas stood beside her, his eyes gentle yet sharp, reminding her silently that every step had been carefully orchestrated, that he had not only protected her but ensured Ethan would be held accountable for every cruel act he had inflicted. Claire knew that from this moment forward, her life would no longer be haunted by fear. The power of her abuser was gone, overturned completely, and for the first time in months, she felt true freedom, her heart filled with the solid belief that from here on, she could live, love, and breathe without the shadow of the past dictating her every move. It was proof that justice and the strength of truth had finally won. Claire Bennett woke the next morning in the cabin, sunlight spilling through the wooden window frame, illuminating the small, warm room without the sudden footsteps or the violent outbursts that once terrified her. She inhaled deeply, letting the clean air settle into her lungs, her heartbeat steady and calm, feeling a lightness she had not known in months. She began her day her own way, making breakfast for herself, walking the forest trails around the cabin, listening to birdsong and the gentle rustling of leaves, savoring the sense of freedom she once believed she had lost forever. In these days, Claire started rebuilding her life step by step, regaining control of her time, reconnecting with her artistic work, learning to trust herself and, slowly, to trust those around her, especially Lucas Merrick, who protected and supported her quietly without ever imposing or controlling. She took time to care for herself, cooking meals she enjoyed, reading, writing in her journal, experimenting with new ceramic techniques, and felt her life settling back into her own hands, no longer dictated by threats or fear. Lucas appeared now and then, never intruding, always watchful, bringing books or small items from the city so she wouldn't feel isolated, yet consistently giving her space to choose, to move freely, to decide for herself. Claire felt the shift in her body and thoughts, safety returning, confidence growing, her sense of autonomy expanding. Each afternoon, she walked the wooded paths, breathing in the fresh air, watching the way the light changed hour by hour, and sensed peace blooming inside her, something she had once only dreamed of but never truly felt. Gradually, she reconnected with old friends, the ones she had withdrawn from out of fear, this time with boundaries, and with Lucas's quiet support behind her, allowing her to rebuild relationships slowly, sharing stories, laughter, and pieces of her passion, without dread of consequences. She joined art classes, met people with similar interests, and let herself ease into community again, gently and naturally, sensing her life returning to something real and steady, something she chose. In the evenings, as the daylight softened, Claire sat by the window, her hands wrapped around a warm cup, watching the silhouette of the forest settling into dusk. For the first time in months, her heart felt calm, her breaths unbroken by fear, and she knew deep down that her life was truly hers now. She had the right to be free, to be happy, to live without the shadow of control or intimidation. And everything she had endured had become the path leading her into this new chapter, a chapter where she could rebuild herself, reclaim her power, and finally discover genuine peace and happiness in the life she chose for herself. One quiet morning in the cabin, as a soft ribbon of sunlight drifted through the wooden window frame, Lucas Merrick appeared at the doorway with a small, deep blue velvet box in his hand. Claire Bennett was sitting at the table, slowly sipping her coffee, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and a tender, unsettled emotion that made her heartbeat quicken, not from fear as before, but from a strange, fragile anticipation. Lucas stepped closer, placing the box gently before her, his eyes calm yet filled with a sincerity so deep it seemed to warm the space between them. His voice was low and steady when he said, "Claire, I want you to see this, not to pressure you, not to pull you toward anything before you are ready, but because I want you to understand how much you matter to me." Claire lifted the lid, and inside lay a simple white gold ring, centered with a small sapphire that shimmered as the light touched it, as if its glow reached directly into her chest. Her eyes widened. Her fingers trembled as she brushed against the ring, and a wave of surprise and emotion washed through her, sharp and warm all at once. Lucas leaned slightly forward, his voice soft but resonant. "This belonged to my mother. She told me to keep it for the person I truly valued, the person I wanted to stand beside for the rest of my life. I want you to have it, not because I expect anything in return, but because you deserve to be cherished and protected." Claire could not speak for a moment. Tears slipped down her cheeks, born not of fear, but of an emotion so full and unexpected that it nearly stole her breath. She looked into Lucas's eyes, steady, gentle, deeply earnest, and, for the first time in many months, she felt the presence of a man who cared for her with no ulterior motive, no power, no hidden demand, only with sincerity. Lucas sat down across from her, resting his hand lightly against the table near hers. His voice was warm, quiet, absolutely respectful. "Claire, I don't want to rush you. I don't want you to feel bound to anything. I just want you to know that I am here, willing to stand beside you, willing to protect you in the way you feel comfortable. This ring is a symbol, not a requirement. It is simply a gentle way of telling you that I want you in my life, but the choice is entirely yours." Her heart tightened. A trembling warmth spread through her chest. She understood that this gesture was not born from impulse, nor from possession, but from thoughtfulness visible in every detail. In the ring he chose, in the distance he kept, in the quiet steadiness of his presence. She touched the ring lightly, took a slow breath, and realized that the fear that haunted her for months had finally begun to dissolve, replaced by trust, by hope, by the faint but steady recognition that she had the right to choose love again, and the right to let herself be protected without losing her freedom. Lucas watched her gently, his eyes warm yet penetrating. "You don't have to answer now," he said softly. "Not today. I just want you to know that I'm ready, and that whatever you choose, I will always respect it. If you want me, I will be here, but never as someone who forces your hand." Claire looked at the ring again, then at Lucas. An emotion rose inside her like a tide, fragile yet resolute. For the first time in so long, she felt safe enough to believe she could choose her own future. In the stillness between them, as afternoon light brushed golden streaks across the cabin floor, Claire understood that this ring was not simply jewelry. It was a symbol of choice, of trust both delicate and powerful, and a quiet invitation to imagine a future she had not dared to dream of. She sat with Lucas at the table, the velvet box still in her hands, her heart echoing the slow rhythm of his breathing as he waited patiently, giving her the space to think, to feel, to reclaim the parts of herself she thought she had lost. She took another deep breath, the fear of the past months slowly melting into something steadier. She felt, for the first time, that she truly held the power to decide her own path. Lucas met her gaze with that same quiet tenderness. "Have you thought it through, Claire?" he asked, his tone warm, never urgent. "I don't want you to rush, but I want you to know I'm ready." A tingling warmth spread through her. She realized she was being offered a choice, not an ultimatum, a future, not a cage. Her fingers reached for his hand. She looked directly into his eyes, her voice trembling, her resolve rising from somewhere deep and long suppressed. "Lucas, She paused for a heartbeat that felt eternal, then whispered firmly, "Yes." Lucas lifted her hand gently, his expression brightening with a joy that was quiet but unmistakable, a rare smile softening his usually sharp features. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he watched her, as though memorizing her face, as though grateful that the decision had come from her heart and not from fear or pressure. Tears welled in her eyes once more, not from sorrow but from relief, from the overwhelming realization that she had allowed herself to trust, to hope, and to choose. Lucas raised a hand and brushed his thumb softly across her cheek. "You understand," he murmured, "that I will always respect you and protect you. But today, this moment, it belongs to you. I am simply grateful that your choice brings me here." Claire felt the chains of fear and doubt that held her for so long finally fall away. Her heart lifted, free at last, and she knew she had stepped into a new part of her life, one defined not by survival but by possibility. The cabin seemed to grow quieter around them, the golden evening light softening the air, holding them inside a moment suspended between past and future. Claire looked at the ring, shimmering on her finger, and felt a swell of awe. It was more than a ring. It was the embodiment of freedom, trust, and hope. She had said yes. She had chosen. She had reclaimed her life. Lucas drew a slow breath, his smile warm and full of affection. "Thank you for trusting me, Claire," he said softly. "We will walk through everything ahead together." Claire smiled, tears glistening but joyful now, her chest light and full, as though she had stepped into the sunlight after a long, cold night. Their wedding took place in the garden behind the cabin, where gentle sunlight slipped through the leaves and painted dancing patterns across the soft green grass. The setting was simple but warm: rows of wooden chairs, jars of wildflowers scattered here and there, the smell of blossoms mingling with birdsong, and the hush of wind moving softly through the branches. Claire walked out in a white dress that was modest, elegant, and beautifully understated. Her hair was pulled back in a loose, graceful bun, with soft strands falling around her face. Her eyes glowed with a mixture of nervousness and happiness so pure it made the world seem newly washed. Lucas stood at the end of the path in a perfectly tailored black suit, his gaze sharp yet tender as he watched her approach. For a man who seldom showed emotion, the depth in his eyes now was unmistakable wonder, love, and a quiet awe. Only a few close friends were present: Mason, their loyal protector, Dean and Evelyn, whose steady support had carried them through storms, and a small-town judge who had known Lucas's family for years. The ceremony felt intimate, sacred in its simplicity. As Claire walked toward Lucas, her heartbeat quickened with joy rather than fear, with the sense that She was stepping into a life she had chosen, into a future built on safety, respect, and shared tenderness. When she reached him, Lucas extended his hand, and she felt a sense of grounding, a strength gentle enough to hold her, yet firm enough to reassure her that she would never be alone again. The judge's questions were brief but meaningful, asking them to affirm their intentions and their choices. Claire and Lucas answered with full hearts, with a quiet conviction shaped by everything they had survived. When Lucas slipped the sapphire ring onto her finger, it caught the sunlight and glowed like a promise made visible. Claire's heart opened in a rush, her breath trembling as she whispered, "I love you." Lucas's voice was warm, steady when he answered, "And I will always love you, Claire." For every day to come. The world around them softened, the wildflowers swaying gently, the birds singing, Evelyn quietly wiping her tears, Dean looking on with eyes brightened by emotion. Everyone there understood the weight of this moment, the beauty of two souls who had walked through darkness, finally finding a place of peace beside each other. When the ceremony ended, Claire and Lucas walked down the path hand in hand, their steps unhurried but steady, savoring each moment of their new beginning. The golden glow of sunset wrapped around the garden, and Claire felt as though she were stepping into a story she had once believed impossible, a story of healing, trust, and profound, quiet joy. The story of Claire Bennett and Lucas Merrick closes here, yet its echo remains as a testament to resilience and the human capacity to rise after the darkest days. From fear, pressure, and violence, Claire found the strength to stand, to seek help, and to rebuild her life from what had been shattered. She proved that even through pain, a person can rediscover light, freedom, and faith in the world again. Her journey reminds us that hope often appears in the form of unexpected allies, people who choose to stand beside us, to protect us, and to honor our choices without taking them away. But more importantly, it is a reminder that the first and strongest form of courage comes from within, from the ability to say no to fear and yes to freedom, happiness, and the future we deserve. Claire's experience is not just her own story. It is a lesson for all of us. Do not hesitate to seek help when you need it. Do not silence your own voice. And trust that truth and justice will prevail when we are patient, prepared, and brave enough to face what scares us. It is also a reminder of a deeper human value, to protect one another, to honor each person's right to safety and choice, and to use strength not to harm, but to offer refuge, peace, and hope. If this story has touched your heart, if it moved you, inspired you, or stayed with you in any way, please remember to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the meaningful stories we share every day. Like and share this video to help spread the message of resilience, love, and justice. We would love to hear your thoughts. Share your own story, your reflections, or simply how this journey made you feel. Every voice matters. Every emotion has value. Thank you for spending your time with us. We look forward to seeing you in the next video, wishing you good health, peaceful days, joy, and hope in every sunrise. Goodbye for now, and see you in the next story.